Hi, I'm Doris Purchase, and welcome to Beyond the Frame, a podcast created just for you by Propeller Art Gallery, artists empowering artists in Toronto. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the hearts and minds of working visual artists today and their practice. In each episode, you will hear illuminating and intimate explorations of all things art, and you'll hear it in the artist's own voice. We'll talk process, inspiration, challenges, and much more. Everything you've ever wanted to know about art making or about the artists themselves happens right here. So let's sit back and have a listen, shall we? Today we welcome Michael J.B. Black. Which ism is it? Under which ism would you classify your work?
I think that we're now, 21 years into a new millennium. I think that kind of a question doesn't really work all that well anymore at this point, because we're not really working with a linear understanding of history in the same way as we once were. So I'm not sure that I know how to answer that or would like to answer it, I think, because it tends to exclude voices, for one thing, and also is based on a sense of the avant-garde and moving forward in a progressivist sort of sense. So I'm not sure how I would answer that. I was thinking a lot about the question and thinking that I'm not really convinced that it applies at this point. I would say that, my own background is, I was very interested in the Canadian, some might call it provincial version of the New York school. I came up under people who came as the generation after that, but I don't think, it's flat painting, it's post-cubist painting in terms of the use of space, but it's not really something that would fit very well into an ism these days, because I tend to move around a little bit between various parameters in my own work, and I think that that's probably all I could say on that one as far as that goes.
Who's your muse? Influencers, educators, mentors? Who has greatly inspired you?
Again, I very much influenced by Painter's 11, by the generation that came after that, but also, those early influences in one's life. I remember in the high school classroom, there was a huge book on Henry Moore. There was originally a graduate thesis called Snow Scene on Michael Snow. I was fascinated by both. I spent a lot of time hanging around the AGO. I went to 3 schools of art. I went to the gallery school. It would be hard to classify and quantify what those things were, but somehow or another they all kind of coalesced into a way of working, a way of thinking. When I was a kid growing up in Thornhill was a very small place, and if you wanted to shop, you either went to Richmond Hill or to Willowdale, and my dad often would drop me off at the Willowdale Library, North York Public Library, and I got stuck into, they had both Art in America and eventually what was Arts Canada, and I would thumb through the pictures and look at the stuff and get a sense of how all of it worked, and tried to sort of hybridize and make my own response to what I was seeing and feeling about the work that I encountered in those places. So all of that stuff kind of coalesced together, I think, to create the sort of stuff that came out, or probably piqued my own interest in the things that were coming out in my own psychological development as I grew up.
Materials matter. What are your chosen favorite tools and preferred medium?
I worked for a long time with acrylic. I like acrylic because it is flexible. I use it as washes. I use it very wet. I build up surfaces. I don't use a lot of medium or anything like that. I tend to go back and forth between stuff that is more organic and stain-oriented to stuff that is very heavily textured, and build up that way. And I've always found acrylic, perhaps because I'm impatient, faster drying than oil. I have worked in oil sometimes, but acrylic is still the medium that I use a lot. When I'm drawing, I tend to grab whatever ballpoint or Sharpie or whatever happens to be around and fill sketchbooks with it. But that's really for the work that I do most of the time is acrylic, and I have enjoyed all of the ways in which it has developed over time, having used it for a lot of years, and like to play with the various qualities that it has.
Slump secrets. What methods do you employ to get yourself out of a slump?
I don't think I have a lot of artistic slumps. The issue with me is, time and finances, and whether there's opportunity in all of our busy lives to do as much work as I feel like I want to be working on. But I don't tend to have sort of the visual artist's equivalent of writer's block a lot. There's just stuff there to do. It's always in the back of my mind. I close my eyes at night and there's a painting there that I'm working on. It's the kind of thing that is always engaging for me, and so I'm not aware of a lot of that kind of thing. As I say, life is busy for all of us, and there are all of the other responsibilities that we have in life. But I think I paint as much as I have time to do, and I'm not aware of a lot of blockages and that sort of thing. When something comes to an end, it seems to come to a sort of natural conclusion, and then I cast around for something else to do. And I think that's been especially true during the pandemic, because I have found it to be a real psychological lifeline to be able to continue to work during this very difficult time for all of us.
In the beginning. So tell me a bit about your process. Do you have a bag of tricks, lucky talismans, or habits? Where do you start? And more importantly, when do you stop?
I have been retired for 3 years or so. The routine in my day since retirement has been, I paint every morning. I'm usually in the studio by about 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and I tend to work that way until, the day starts and there's other things to do. That would cover the habit part. In terms of how it works, every sort of set of pieces tends to generate its own rules and parameters. Currently, I'm working through stuff that is fairly organic in nature, and it's set into a kind of firm, hard-edge sort of architectural framework. And the rules for that tend to be, I start off with a staining process that I have no idea where the image is going to go or how the image is going to develop. And then once it's dry, that stuff gets painted flat on a tabletop, and then when it's dry, I put it up on the wall and see what it suggests and where it's likely to take me to develop the most dynamic composition. But other things work in different ways. When I'm doing the heavier textured stuff, it's often a process of laying down pigment very thickly and developing it, and then using spray bottles to pull out the colors and see where they're going to settle and meld together, and again wait till it dries and then see what other things happen. I guess the general answer is, when I'm setting about the process, the first is absolutely and entirely intuitive, and then gradually works its way into setting up a composition from what I've already got. And when to stop is always a problem with abstract painting. I think I'm hopefully getting better at that after 40-odd years, but not always sure. And it seems to suggest an end when it's coming to the end of the shapes that need to be there and all the rest of it. And then I hopefully stop at the right place. I have, over my lifetime doing this, certainly overworked things from time to time. One of the ways in which I try and get around that is to work on multiple pieces at once. But generally, I think that's the way it goes. As I say, the things set up their own parameters, starting intuitively and then following the rules for a particular set of things.
Calling all emo. What do you wish people to think or feel when they contemplate your work?
I'd really rather not have a preconceived sense of what people see when they look at the stuff. I have always been drawn, ever since a young age, to abstraction, because I felt like it, not only for me as somebody making the stuff, but also for those people who are viewing it, it has more than one reference. It has hopefully more than one set of resonances in terms of how people can view it, what they see in it, that sort of thing. So I try not to set up a situation where I have a particular sense of what people should see or can see. I'd really rather leave that up to the viewer and see what they come up with out of what they've engaged with. And that's really the kind of thing that I have in mind when I'm working. I go back and forth, as I say, between organic things and things that are more sort of relevant to an understanding of cultural artifacts, I think. So, hopefully there's a sense of that in what gets produced, but I really would rather not predict or be too heavy-handed in terms of what people see. I'd rather leave that up to them.
The struggle is real. Talk to me about your biggest challenges as an artist. What methods do you use to overcome these challenges?
I think the challenges quite often in terms of the work itself are entirely personal. I have an idea in my head of where things want to go, not necessarily piece by piece, but in terms of making the thing as good as I can make it. And there are some things that are intuitive that, you lay down something quickly and that needs to stop right away. Whereas other times it takes a lot of work. There are certainly times when I think I've set myself a task and I'm not sure I'm up to the task I've set myself. But those are really the kinds of challenges as an artist for me. I probably should pay more attention to, but have not always paid a lot of attention to, its sort of larger impact on things and getting it out there and getting it seen and all of that stuff. But the struggle for me, if I'm honest, has mostly been the struggle to, produce the best work that I can produce, and then trying to make sure that it gets out there as much as I can. But I guess I've been less engaged with that part than I have been with the actual work itself.
Picture perfect. In your opinion, what constitutes a perfect piece of art? And what qualities in your own work would you signify as a perfect work? For example, perfect composition, confident brushstrokes illustrating a concept, or something else altogether.
I'm not sure that I can get in line with the idea of a perfect piece of art. I don't think any artist ever feels like whatever they do is perfect. I'm sometimes happier with a piece than other times. Sometimes I think I've done a better job than I've done other times, but it's never as good as I would like it to be. There is an apocryphal story about a well-known Toronto painter in the 70s who, when asked by one of his students what he thought his best work was, he always said the next one. And I guess I feel a little bit like that. I'm never very sure what I do and is that good. I do the very best I can at a particular time. Another one of my instructors always used to say, if you look at a Van Gogh, every brushstroke has purpose. And I always remember that as I'm working my way through something. Depending on, the kind of work I'm doing, I use brushes, I use old bits of trim, I use cardboard, I use all kinds of different things to make stuff. But again, it's to whatever set of rules I've set for the particular series or what have you that I'm working on. But I'm never very sure that anything that I do comes any kind of way close to perfection. I'm just doing the best I can on a particular piece, and hopefully it comes close to some sense of the conception that I had to begin with. But I'll stand back and look at something, and even something that's been done a long time, and think I should have done this or I should have done that.
Art Speak. How do you feel about titling, discussing, and explaining your work?
I'm always happy to talk about the work. I think it's engaging to do. I'm not happy to lead the discussion in terms of having a right answer or wanting people to perceive it in a particular way, but I'm always happy to talk about my own experience with it. Titling has been, from time to time, a difficult task. The older I get, the simpler they get, and I think that that's on purpose because hopefully that gives people a bit more room. For instance, the series I'm currently working on is called Soundflower, and it comes from an album that came out last year led by Jacob Bro, and it was a very evocative title for me. It's a particular cut on that 2020 album of his. But it's a sense that something small and short that has a lot of resonance in a lot of different directions, I think is kind of the way I like to go with titling now. I had great long flowery ones when I was young and far more romantic that I think I wouldn't want to use now because I think they push people in a particular direction, and I'd like them to perceive the work as they would themselves and see what comes up in their own minds and hearts about it as they go along.
Heavy metal or classical? What do you listen to while you work? Or is silence your thing?
I listen to a lot of different kinds of music in the studio. I'm not very fond of vocal music because I find it more distracting. Since the 70s, I've been a big fan of ECM as a label, and I tend to listen to a lot of music that falls into that. I like stuff that's, well, it would be called, in some respects, jazz-based or ambient-based, but things that tend to challenge but provide a way of getting into that part of my head that is not the most rational one. So I guess if I was trying to say what I listen to, it would be what might be still considered or what used to be labeled classical music and more contemporary music within that genre, and also various things that might fall under the category of Nordic jazz, or certainly a lot of things on the ECM label.
Why for art thou? Why do you make art?
Art has been a very basic part of my life since, I think, my early teens. It's something that I do as a basic way of communicating, of understanding the world around me, of making sense of my own life in it and my connection to it. I studied art and all of that stuff and did art history at university as well as art school. But more than that, it's a very basic kind of thing. After art school, I thought the responsible thing would be to take a teaching degree, and after a bumpy bit at the beginning, I fell in love with teaching and disappeared into a classroom for 30 years, but always kept a small amount of output going on, and then obviously at various spurts and starts, larger ones. And then, it trickled down to a crawl, and in 2005, a friend really got me started again. But it's always been a very basic way of understanding the world around me. So I don't really know the why any more than that, other than just to say that it's a kind of a basic part of how I live my life or choose to live my life, and the way in which I see the things around me and see the people around me and see the world around me. It's not lost on me that I am in a very privileged position, especially right now with all that's going on in the world, to have the opportunity to work in a studio, to think about these things, to contemplate them while there's been so much suffering and so much that's been very difficult for so many in a global sense. And I count myself very lucky to be able to be painting these days and to think about that. And although it's been a real psychological lifeline, as I said earlier, for me during this time, I'm very aware that so many are not able to avail themselves of such opportunities. So I'm grateful for that.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Frame, a PAG podcast. To hear more episodes and to view the artist's works, please visit www.propellerartgallery.ca. Hosted by Doris Purchase, produced by Tracy Thompson, and recorded at the Orange Lounge Studio in Toronto. Also, the Propeller Art Gallery recognizes the presence of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat nations. We acknowledge we are hosted on land governed by Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We are committed to peaceably sharing and caring for the resources around the Great Lakes and operating the gallery on the principles of inclusiveness as we continue to exhibit art created by artists from all over the world. Thank you for listening.